The blood on Kellan Jameson's hands would not wash away, no matter how many times he scrubbed them in the cold water of the creek. And he knew in the depths of his soul that no amount of time would cleanse the stain of what he had witnessed 3 years ago on that God-forsaken battlefield in Virginia. Now, in the autumn of 1868, he rode through the high desert country of Nevada, his horses' hooves kicking up dust that settled on his worn leather chaps, heading toward a town called Lovelock, where he hoped to find work that would occupy his hands and mind enough to keep the nightmares at bay. The war had taken everything from him: his younger brother, his sweetheart who had married another when he returned hollow and broken, and the easy smile that his mother used to say could charm the birds from the trees. At 28 years old, Kellan felt ancient, weathered like the sagebrush that dotted the landscape, and he expected nothing more from life than the slow march of seasons, each one as joyless as the last, an endless procession of work and sleep, and the occasional bottle of whiskey to dull the edges of memory. Lovelock sat nestled in the Humboldt River Valley, a rough collection of wooden buildings that served the ranchers and miners who scraped their livings from this harsh land. Kellan rode down the main street as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him too much of muzzle flashes in the dark, and he forced his eyes forward, focusing on the practical matters of finding a stable for his horse and a roof for himself. The Silver State Saloon looked no different from 100 others he had passed through, but the sign outside advertised rooms for rent, and that was enough for a man with simple needs. Inside, the familiar smell of tobacco smoke and spilled beer greeted him, along with the low murmur of men's voices and the clink of glasses. The bartender, a thick-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard, looked up as Kellan approached. "Help you, friend." "Room for the night, and information about work if you have it," Kellan said, his voice rough from disuse. He had spoken to no one but his horse for the past 3 days. $5 gets you a room and breakfast. As for work, you might try the Morrison Ranch about 6 miles west of here. Old Samuel Morrison died last month, and his daughter is trying to keep the place running, but she is having trouble finding reliable help. Most men do not want to work for a woman, no matter how well she pays. Kellan felt a flicker of something that might have been interest, though it died quickly. Work was work, and he had no pride left to prevent him from taking orders from anyone. "I will ride out there tomorrow." "Fair warning," the bartender said, sliding a key across the scarred wooden bar. "Maeve Morrison is particular about who she hires. She has sent more than a few men packing when they prove to be lazy or disrespectful. But if you are a hard worker and keep your word, she will treat you fair." The name lodged in Kellan's mind as he climbed the narrow stairs to his room. Maeve Morrison. He wondered what kind of woman would try to run a ranch alone in this unforgiving country, then decided it did not matter. He would offer his services, and she would either hire him or not. His expectations had been ground down to nothing by years of disappointment. That night, sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by dreams of cannon fire and screaming horses. He woke before dawn, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool desert night, and gave up on rest entirely. After a breakfast of eggs and coffee in the saloon's dining room, he saddled his horse and headed west along the road the bartender had described. The Morrison Ranch revealed itself gradually as he crested a low rise, a sprawling collection of buildings that spoke of better days now fading. The main house needed paint, and several fences sagged, but the barn looked sturdy enough and he could see cattle grazing in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home, so he rode up to the hitching post and dismounted, his boots crunching on the hard, packed earth. Before he could knock, the front door opened, and Kellan found himself face to face with a woman who struck him like a physical blow. She stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the mountains. Her face was beautiful in an unconventional way, strong-featured and sunburned, with lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often, though her expression now was guarded and assessing. She wore men's trousers and a faded blue shirt, and held a rifle with the casual competence of someone who knew how to use it. "If you are here about work, I am listening," she said, her voice clear and direct. "If you are here to tell me I should sell this place and move back east where women belong, you can turn around right now." Kellan realized he was staring and forced himself to speak. "The former, madam. My name is Kellan Jameson. The bartender in town said you might need ranch hands." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his worn clothes, the careful way he held himself, the weariness in his eyes. "Maeve Morrison. Come inside and we can talk properly. I am not hiring based on a conversation conducted on my front porch." He followed her into a house that was clean but cluttered with the detritus of ranch life, ledgers stacked on the dining table, rope coiled in a corner, a saddle waiting for repair. She gestured for him to sit, then took the chair across from him, the rifle propped within easy reach. The wariness in her posture told him she had dealt with trouble before. "I need 2 men, maybe 3, for general ranch work," she began. "Mending fences, managing the cattle, helping with the horses. My father kept a crew of 4, but 3 died in accidents or moved on, and the last one quit 2 weeks after my father passed. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. The bunkhouse needs some fixing up, but it is weatherproof. I expect an honest day's work, and I will not tolerate drinking or fighting or any behavior that disrupts the operation of this ranch. Can you meet those terms?" "Yes, madam," Kellan said. "I can do the work. I grew up on a ranch in Missouri before the war." Her expression shifted slightly at the mention of the war, something softening in her eyes. "Which side?" "Union. 3rd Missouri Infantry." She nodded slowly. "My father was too old to fight, but he lost 2 brothers at Wilson's Creek. I do not hold grudges about the war, Mr. Jameson. It is over, and we all lost too much. What matters to me is whether you can handle cattle and mend a fence and put in a full day's work without complaining." "I can do all that," he said, and for the first time in years, he felt a small stirring of something beyond resignation. There was something about this woman, about the way she held herself, about the determination in her voice, that penetrated the armor of indifference he had built around himself. "Then you are hired, provisionally. I will give you a month to prove yourself. If you work out, we can discuss a longer arrangement. The bunkhouse is behind the barn. Get yourself settled and then find me. I will show you the property and explain what needs doing." Kellan stood, suddenly awkward, unsure of the protocol. "Thank you, Miss Morrison. I will not disappoint you." "It is Mrs. Morrison, actually, though I am widowed," she said, rising as well. "My husband died 4 years ago, kicked by a horse. No children. So it has been just my father and me running this place, and now just me. I'm telling you this so you understand the situation here. Some men get ideas about a woman alone, and I want to be clear from the start that I am your employer, nothing more. If that is going to be a problem, speak now." "No problem, madam," Kellan said, meeting her eyes. "You have my word." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded and showed him to the door. As Kellan led his horse to the bunkhouse, he found his thoughts occupied by Maeve Morrison in a way that surprised him. He had not looked at a woman with any real interest since before the war, his heart too deadened by grief and guilt to feel anything beyond the most basic physical needs, which he had learned to ignore. but there was something about her that reached past his defenses, something in the set of her shoulders and the directness of her gaze that made him want to prove himself worthy of her trust. The bunkhouse was rougher than she had implied, with gaps in the walls that let in the wind and a stove that looked like it might collapse if someone breathed on it too hard. But Kellan had slept in far worse conditions. He unpacked his few belongings, taking care with the wooden box that held his brother's letters and his mother's Bible, the only possessions he truly valued, then went in search of his new employer. He found her in the barn, examining a horse's hoof with focused attention. She looked up as he approached. "That was quick. Come on, I will show you around." For the next 2 hours, Maeve led him across the property, pointing out the grazing areas, the water sources, the sections of fence that needed immediate attention, and the areas where they would drive the cattle before winter set in. She spoke with authority and knowledge, clearly someone who had spent her life learning this land and this work. Kellan listened carefully, asking questions when necessary, but mostly absorbing information and watching the way she moved through this world she was fighting to keep. "How much land?" he asked as they stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. 2,000 acres, give or take. My father bought it 15 years ago, built it up from nothing. It is not the biggest ranch in Nevada, but it is ours, and it is worth fighting for." She paused, her expression distant. "Was ours. Is mine now, I suppose, though that still feels strange to say." "How long has he been gone?" 6 weeks. Heart gave out while he was checking the cattle. I found him near the creek, lying in the grass like he had just decided to take a nap. Her voice remained steady, but Kellan heard the grief underneath. "He was 62 years old and worked every single day of his life. I think part of me believed he would just go on forever." "I am sorry for your loss," Kellan said, the words inadequate but sincere. "Thank you." She turned away from the view, heading back down the ridge. "I have been running this place essentially on my own for the past month, and I am exhausted. I need help, Mr. Jameson, and I need it from someone reliable. The banker in town has been pressuring me to sell. Says a woman cannot manage a ranch of this size. But I will be damned if I let go of everything my father built, just because some men think I am not capable." The fierce pride in her voice stirred something in Kellan, a protective instinct he thought had died on the battlefield. "Then we will prove them wrong," he heard himself say. She glanced at him, surprise flickering across her face, then smiled, and the transformation was startling. Her whole face lit up, years falling away, and Kellan felt something in his chest that might have been his heart remembering how to beat properly. "I appreciate the confidence, Mr. Jameson. Let us hope it is warranted." Over the following days, Kellan threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised even him. He repaired fences until his hands bled, worked with the cattle until every muscle ached, and spent his evenings fixing up the bunkhouse to make it weatherproof before the snow came. Maeve worked alongside him more often than not, never asking him to do anything she would not do herself, and he found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, fascinated by her competence and strength. They fell into an easy rhythm, working mostly in companionable silence, though occasionally she would share stories about her father or the ranch, and he found himself offering his own fragments of history in return. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his mother's flower garden and his brother's terrible singing voice. He did not tell her about the war, not yet, though he sensed she knew. It haunted him from the way he sometimes startled at sudden noises or stared off into the distance, lost in memories he could not escape. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after he had arrived, Maeve invited him to the main house for dinner, saying she was tired of eating alone and he surely must be tired of his own cooking. Kellan accepted, though he felt awkward and out of place in the warm kitchen with its smell of roasting chicken and fresh bread. Maeve had cleaned up, her hair loose around her shoulders for once, and she wore a simple green dress that made her eyes look like jade. "Sit down before you wear a hole in the floor," she said with amusement, gesturing to the table. "It is just dinner, Mr. Jameson, not an interrogation." "Kellan," he said, taking a seat. "You can call me Kellan. Mr. Jameson makes me feel like I should be someone more respectable." "Then you must call me Maeve. Mrs. Morrison makes me feel like my mother-in-law." She brought plates to the table, serving generous portions. "Tell me honestly, how are you settling in? Is the work what you expected?" "The work is good," Kellan said, meaning it. "It is exactly what I needed. Keeps my hands and mind occupied." "Occupied enough to drive away bad memories?" she asked gently, sitting across from him. He looked up sharply, finding her watching him with understanding in her eyes. "That obvious? Only to someone who has spent time with haunted people. My husband came back from the war different, broken in ways I could not fix. He tried to be the man he was before, but the ghosts would not let him go. I think part of him was relieved when that horse kicked him. At least he did not have to fight anymore." The words hung in the air between them, painful in their honesty. Kellan set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. "I am sorry. That must have been hard to live with." "It was. But I also understand it better now than I did then. Grief and trauma do not follow any rules or timelines. They just sit inside you, changing everything." She reached across the table, her hand hovering near his, not quite touching. "I am not trying to pry into your past, Kellan. I just want you to know that you are safe here. Whatever you are running from, whatever you are trying to forget, you do not have to face it alone." Something cracked inside Kellan at those words, some wall he had carefully constructed beginning to crumble. He found himself talking, the words spilling out about his brother James who had died at Gettysburg, about the guilt of surviving when so many better men had not, about the nightmares that left him gasping and shaking in the dark. Maeve listened without judgment, her gray eyes steady and compassionate, and when he finally fell silent, she simply squeezed his hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me." From that night forward, something shifted between them. The careful formality dissolved, replaced by an easy friendship that surprised them both. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings, Kellan often found himself at the main house, helping with repairs or simply sitting by the fire while Maeve worked on her ledgers. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their histories in small increments, learning each other in the way people do when they are not quite ready to acknowledge what is growing between them. Kellan began to notice small things about Maeve that lodged in his heart like splinters. The way she hummed while she worked, always the same handful of melodies. The smudge of ink she invariably got on her chin when doing bookwork. The fierce protectiveness she showed toward the animals in her care. The laugh she tried to hide behind her hand when something genuinely amused her. He caught himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering what she was doing, whether she had eaten enough, whether she was warm enough in the increasingly cold nights. He also began to notice the toll the ranch was taking on her. Despite his help, there was simply too much work for two people, and she drove herself relentlessly, up before dawn and working until dark. He worried about her in ways he had not worried about anyone since his brother died, and the realization that he cared this much frightened him. He had convinced himself he was incapable of feeling anything beyond surface-level emotions, but Maeve was proving him wrong with every passing day. November arrived with the first real snowfall, a light dusting that made everything look clean and new. Kellan was in the barn, mucking out stalls when Maeve came looking for him, her face troubled. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. 20 head of cattle have gone missing from the north pasture. I found a section of fence that was deliberately cut, not just broken from age or weather. Kellan set aside his pitchfork, his mind immediately jumping to possibilities. Rustlers, most likely. There is a group that has been working this area, hitting the smaller ranches that do not have enough men to defend themselves properly. I should have expected they would come for us eventually. She paced the barn, agitation clear in every movement. Those cattle represent a significant portion of my herd. I cannot afford to lose them. We can track them, Kellan said. The snow will make it easier. If they are still in the area, we might be able to catch up before they sell the stock. It will be dangerous. These men do not take kindly to being confronted. I did not come here expecting easy work. He met her eyes. Let me help you, Maeve. That is what you hired me for. She studied him for a long moment, something complicated flickering across her face. All right. We leave in an hour. Bring your rifle and extra ammunition. And Kellan, thank you. They tracked the missing cattle north through the snow, following the clear trail left by 20 head and several horses. The trail led into rougher country, rocky and covered in scrub pine, the kind of terrain that favored outlaws and desperate men. Kellan kept his rifle ready, his senses alert for any sign of danger, while Maeve rode beside him with the steady confidence of someone who had spent her life in the saddle. They found the cattle near sunset, penned in a makeshift corral in a narrow canyon. 3 men sat around a campfire, passing a bottle between them, their horses picketed nearby. Kellan and Maeve took cover behind a rock outcropping, assessing the situation. We could go back to town. Get the sheriff, Maeve whispered. By the time we get back, they will have moved the cattle and be long gone, Kellan replied. We need to handle this now. 3 against 2, and we have the element of surprise. She checked her rifle. I will not let them steal what my father built. They circled around to get a better position. Then Kellan called out in his strongest voice. You are on Morrison land and you are in possession of stolen cattle. Step away from your weapons and we can resolve this peacefully. The 3 men scrambled to their feet, reaching for rifles, and Kellan knew immediately that peace was not an option. He fired a shot into the air, the crack echoing off the canyon walls. The next one will not be a warning. For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then the oldest of the 3 rustlers, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, slowly raised his hands. Easy now, friend. We are just passing through, no need for anyone to get hurt. You are passing through with 20 head that do not belong to you, Maeve said, moving into view with her rifle trained on the men. I want my cattle back, and I want you off my land. You have until I count to 10 to start riding or I start shooting. Something ugly crossed the scarred man's face. That is no way to talk, little lady. Maybe you need someone to teach you manners. 1, Maeve said calmly. The rustlers looked at each other, calculating odds. Kellan could see them thinking about going for their guns, weighing their chances. His finger tightened on the trigger, his body remembering the sick tension of waiting for violence to begin. 2. You are making a mistake, the scarred man said. There are more of us than just us 3. You take those cattle back and our boss will come looking for you. 3. Maeve, Kellan said quietly, keeping his eyes on the rustlers. Let me handle this. 4. Something in her voice must have convinced the rustlers she meant business, because the scarred man cursed and gestured to his companions. This is not worth dying over. Come on, boys. We will find easier pickings elsewhere. They mounted their horses slowly, glaring at Maeve and Kellan the entire time, then rode out of the canyon at a deliberate pace that suggested the confrontation was not over, just postponed. Kellan kept his rifle ready until they disappeared from sight, then finally lowered it, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. That was close, he said. Maeve lowered her own rifle and he saw that she was trembling too. Too close. But we got the cattle back and no one got hurt. I will count that as a win. They drove the cattle back to Morrison land, working through the cold night, neither willing to risk leaving them unattended. By the time they got the herd secured and the fence repaired, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They stood together by the corral, exhausted and triumphant, their breath making clouds in the frigid air. I could not have done that alone, Maeve said quietly. Thank you for standing with me. Always, Kellan replied, the word coming out before he could think about what it meant, what it promised. She turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his heart stutter. They stood close enough that he could see the individual snowflakes caught in her dark hair, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body in the cold morning air. He wanted to reach for her, to close the distance between them, but years of loss had taught him to be cautious with his heart. Maeve must have seen something in his face, because she stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. Kellan, she said, his name a question and an invitation all at once. He kissed her then, unable to resist any longer, his cold hands coming up to cup her face as her arms wrapped around his waist. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something precious. Then it deepened, becoming more urgent, months of suppressed longing pouring out in that single moment of connection. She tasted like coffee and snow and possibility, and Kellan felt something inside him that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maeve rested her forehead against his. I did not think I would ever feel this way again, she whispered. Neither did I, Kellan admitted. I thought that part of me died in the war, but it did not. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. We are both still alive, still capable of feeling, still deserving of happiness. Do you not think we have earned that? I do not know what I have earned, Kellan said honestly. But I know that I want this, want you, more than I have wanted anything in years. Then stop fighting it. She kissed him again, softer this time. We have both spent too long alone, Kellan. Maybe it is time we stopped punishing ourselves for surviving. Over the following weeks, as winter settled in earnest over Nevada, Kellan and Maeve grew closer in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. They maintained a careful propriety in public, aware of how small-town gossip could damage a woman's reputation, but in private moments, they explored this tentative new relationship with the wonder of people who had given up on love. Kellan moved his few belongings into the main house on a snowy December afternoon, neither of them willing to articulate exactly what that meant, but both understanding it as a commitment. They settled into domestic routines with surprising ease, cooking meals together, sitting by the fire in the evenings, falling into bed exhausted and content after long days of work. Kellan found himself smiling for no reason, catching himself humming the same tunes that Maeve favored, looking forward to each new day in a way he had not since before the war. He also found himself opening up to her about the darkest corners of his past, the memories he had tried so hard to bury. One night, after a particularly vivid nightmare left him gasping and disoriented, Maeve held him and let him talk about Gettysburg, about watching his brother die, about the crushing guilt of survival. She did not try to tell him it was not his fault or that time would heal all wounds. She simply listened and held him and loved him through the darkness, and that was everything. I expected to spend the rest of my life numb, Kellan told her one night as they lay in bed, the firelight casting shadows on the walls. I thought I had used up all my capacity for joy, that I would just go through the motions until my body gave out. And then I met you, and everything changed. You changed my life too, Maeve said, tracing patterns on his chest. After my husband died, I told myself I was done with men, done with marriage, done with anything that could hurt me that badly again. I was going to focus on the ranch and nothing else. But you, Kellan Jameson, you snuck past all my defenses. Good, he said, kissing the top of her head. Because I am not going anywhere. Christmas came, their first together, and they celebrated quietly in the warm house while snow fell outside. Kellan had carved Maeve a wooden box for her papers, spending hours in the barn working on the detail, and her face when she opened it made all the effort worthwhile. She gave him a new leather journal, saying she thought he might want to write down some of his memories, the good ones from before the war, so they were not lost forever. They ate a simple meal and danced to no music in the firelight, and Kellan thought he had never been happier. The new year of 1869 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow that kept them close to the house for days at a time. Kellan used the time to make repairs inside, fixing a persistent leak in the roof, replacing a cracked window, building new shelves for Maeve's growing collection of books. She baked bread and worked on the ranch accounts, and read to him in the evenings from a worn copy of Shakespeare that had belonged to her father. They were building a life together, piece by piece, and it felt right in a way nothing had felt right for Kellan in years. In February, word came through a traveling merchant that the rustlers they had confronted had been arrested trying to steal horses from a ranch near Reno. The leader, a man named Sykes, had implicated several others in various thefts across the territory, and they would all be facing trial. Maeve and Kellan were relieved to know the threat was over, but more than that, they were grateful they had faced it together. "We make a good team," Maeve said that evening, leaning against Kellan as they watched the sun set over the snowy landscape. "In all the ways that matter." "We do," Kellan agreed. He had been carrying a question for weeks now, afraid to voice it, afraid of presuming too much. But standing there with her in his arms, he found the courage. "Maeve, I know we have not been together long, and I know my past is complicated, but I need you to know that I love you, completely, permanently. You brought me back to life when I thought I was beyond saving." She turned in his arms to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "I love you too, Kellan, so much it scares me sometimes." "Then marry me," he said, the words tumbling out. "Make this official. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in hiring some broken-down cowboy who rode into your life last autumn." "You were never broken," Maeve said fiercely. "Wounded, yes. Grieving, yes, but never broken. And yes, I will marry you, today, tomorrow, whenever you want, because you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They were married in March, a simple ceremony in the small church in Lovelock with the bartender and the local school teacher as witnesses. Maeve wore a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Kellan borrowed a suit from the general store owner, and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife with a smile that suggested he had been expecting this development for months. Afterward, they rode back to the ranch through spring sunshine, the snow finally melting to reveal the land beneath, and Kellan felt like he was riding toward a future he had never dared to hope for. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The cattle began dropping calves, and Kellan and Maeve spent long days checking on the new arrivals, making sure mothers and babies were healthy and accounted for. They hired 2 additional hands, young men from town who were eager for work and respectful of Maeve's authority. The ranch began to thrive again under their combined efforts, and when Maeve did the accounts in April, she announced with delight that they would turn a profit that year. "Your father would be proud," Kellan said, pulling her into his arms. "I think he would be," Maeve agreed. "And I think he would have liked you. He always said the measure of a man was whether he showed up when times were hard. "I am not going anywhere," Kellan promised. "This is home now. You are home." In May, Maeve announced she was pregnant. The news delivered with a mixture of joy and nervousness as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Kellan felt his heart expand with a happiness so intense it was almost painful, the future suddenly full of possibilities he had stopped imagining years ago. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Maeve asked, searching his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Kellan said. He kissed her gently, then more deeply, trying to convey everything he felt in that single gesture. "I love you, Maeve. I love our life. I love what we are building together, and I already love this child with everything in me." The pregnancy progressed through the hot summer months, and Kellan found himself becoming increasingly protective, insisting Maeve rest more and work less, though she laughed at his worrying and kept up with most of her duties until she was too large to climb onto a horse easily. They spent the evenings planning for the baby, converting a small room next to their bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle from pine wood, and stitching tiny clothes from soft fabric ordered from San Francisco. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1870, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to everyone within earshot. Kellan held the tiny, squalling bundle with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the surge of love and terror that came with being responsible for something so small and precious. "He is perfect," Maeve said tiredly from the bed, her face glowing despite her exhaustion. "Just like his father." "I am far from perfect," Kellan said, unable to take his eyes off his son's tiny face. "But I promise I will do everything in my power to be the father he deserves." They named him James Samuel, honoring both Kellan's brother and Maeve's father, and the baby became the center of their world. Kellan discovered reserves of patience he never knew he possessed, walking the floor with James during colicky nights, changing diapers without complaint, and singing the lullabies his own mother had sung to him. He had expected fatherhood to bring back the grief of losing his brother, but instead, it felt like a kind of healing, a way of honoring James's memory by raising a child who would carry his name forward. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, and they expanded gradually, buying an adjacent 100 acres when the neighboring rancher decided to move to California. Maeve proved to be a brilliant businesswoman, negotiating favorable contracts with buyers in Virginia City and Carson City, while Kellan managed the day-to-day operations with quiet efficiency. They hired more hands as needed and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock. Young James grew into a sturdy, happy child who adored his parents and the animals on the ranch. By the time he was 2, he was following Kellan everywhere, his small legs working hard to keep up with his father's longer stride. Kellan taught him about horses and cattle, about respecting the land and working hard, and felt his own damaged soul continuing to heal with every moment spent with his son. In the spring of 1872, Maeve announced another pregnancy, and their daughter arrived that October, a tiny thing with her mother's gray eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Sarah Catherine after both grandmothers, and she completed their family in ways Kellan had not known were possible. Watching Maeve nurse their daughter while James played at her feet, Kellan was struck by how far he had come from that hollow man who had ridden into Lovelock expecting nothing but empty seasons and joyless work. "What are you thinking?" Maeve asked, catching him staring. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Kellan said honestly. 4 years ago I did not think I had anything left to live for. Now I have everything." "We have everything," Maeve corrected, reaching for his hand. "We built this together, Kellan." Your love brought me back to life just as much as mine did for you." As their children grew, Kellan found himself thinking less about the war, the memories losing their sharp edges as new, happier memories accumulated. He would never forget what he had lost, never stop missing his brother or regretting the years he had wasted in despair, but those losses no longer defined him. He was a husband now, a father, a rancher, a man with a future to build and a family to protect. The ranch hands respected him. The townspeople greeted him warmly when he rode into Lovelock for supplies, and he had earned a reputation as a fair employer and skilled cattleman. But more than any external success, it was the quiet moments that mattered most to him. Reading stories to James and Sarah before bed, dancing with Maeve in the kitchen while dinner cooked on the stove, working side by side under the vast Nevada sky. These were the moments that proved he was alive, truly alive, in ways he had not been for years. In 1874, Maeve became pregnant again, and their second son arrived that summer, a robust baby they named Daniel Thomas. With 3 children now, the house was full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Kellan built an addition to the house, expanding the kitchen and adding another bedroom, and took pride in creating a home that would shelter his growing family for years to come. James, now 4 years old, took his role as big brother seriously, helping to entertain Sarah and carefully holding baby Daniel under watchful adult supervision. Kellan watched his children interact and felt a fierce gratitude for the second chance life had given him. He had expected seasons without joy, had resigned himself to a life of mere survival, but joy had bloomed in Maeve's presence and continued to flourish in the family they had created together. One evening in late autumn, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Kellan and Maeve sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. They had been married 5.5 years now, and Kellan still sometimes had to pinch himself to believe this was his life. "You ever regret it?" he asked Maeve. "Taking a chance on me?" "Never," she said without hesitation. "You are the best decision I ever made." "Well, you and keeping the ranch instead of selling like everyone said I should." "You saved me," Kellan said quietly. "I was drowning when I came here, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. You gave me a reason to want to wake up in the morning." "You saved me too," Maeve replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was so lonely, Kellan, so tired of fighting alone. You gave me a partner, someone who saw me as an equal instead of a problem to be managed. And you gave me this beautiful family, this beautiful life. How could I ever regret that?" They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the whisper of wind through the sagebrush, the occasional whinny from the barn. This land had become as much a part of Kellan as his own heartbeat, and he could not imagine living anywhere else. "I want to expand the herd next spring," Maeve said eventually. "We have the grazing land and the market prices are good. I think we could easily support another 100 head. Kellan smiled, still amazed by her business acumen and ambition. "Then that is what we will do, whatever you think is best for the ranch." "Our ranch," she corrected. "This belongs to both of us now, Kellan. You have more than earned an equal stake in everything we have built." "I came here with nothing but a horse and a lot of bad memories," Kellan said. "Everything good in my life came from you." "That is not true," Maeve argued. "You brought yourself. Your strength, your kindness, your capacity for hard work and deep love. Those are not things I gave you. Those are things you already had, buried under grief and trauma. I just helped you find them again." She was right, Kellan realized. He had not been as broken as he thought. The pieces had still been there, waiting to be put back together by the right hands. Maeve's hands, and his own, once he learned to believe he deserved a second chance. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. James learned to ride at 5, mastering a gentle mare with his father's patient guidance. Sarah proved to have her mother's head for numbers, helping with basic arithmetic in the ranch accounts before she was 6. Daniel was the adventurous one, constantly getting into trouble and needing to be rescued from increasingly creative predicaments. In 1876, Maeve gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Robert John and Emily Grace. The house overflowed with children now, 5 small people who filled every corner with energy and love. Kellan expanded the house again, adding a proper second floor with bedrooms for each child, determined that his family would have space to grow and thrive. The ranch prospered beyond their early expectations. Their cattle were known for quality throughout Nevada, and buyers came to them instead of the other way around. Kellan and Maeve employed 8 full-time hands now, and during roundup season, they hired additional help from town. They had become one of the most successful ranches in the territory, but neither of them let success change who they were. They still worked alongside their employees, still lived modestly despite their growing wealth, still treated everyone with respect regardless of station. Kellan found particular satisfaction in mentoring the younger ranch hands, passing along the skills his own father had taught him, and the wisdom hard experience had earned. Several young men who started working for the Jamesons went on to buy their own spreads, and Kellan took pride in knowing he had helped them build better lives. As the children grew older, Kellan made sure they understood the value of hard work and the importance of education. He and Maeve hired a tutor from Carson City to come 3 times a week, ensuring their children could read and write and cipher properly. James showed an aptitude for working with horses, while Sarah loved the business side of the ranch. Daniel wanted to be a lawman when he grew up, endlessly fascinated by stories of sheriffs and justice. The twins were still too young to show clear preferences, but Kellan loved watching their personalities emerge. In quiet moments, usually late at night when the house was finally still, Kellan would reflect on the journey that had brought him to this place. If someone had told him 10 years ago that he would be a happily married father of 5, running a successful ranch in Nevada, he would have laughed bitterly at the impossibility. But here he was, living a life beyond anything he had allowed himself to dream. The nightmares still came occasionally, sudden violent flashes from the war that left him gasping in the darkness. But they were less frequent now, and Maeve always knew how to bring him back, grounding him in the present with her touch and her voice. He had learned to live with his scars, to honor his losses without being destroyed by them. His brother James lived on in his nephew's name, and in the stories Kellan told about him. The man he had been before the war was gone forever, but the man he had become was someone he could respect. By 1880, the ranch encompassed nearly 4,000 acres, and the Jameson name was known throughout Nevada as synonymous with quality and integrity. James, now 10 years old, was already proving himself a capable young rancher, able to work alongside the adult hands with confidence. Sarah, at 8, kept better accounts than many grown businessmen. Daniel, at 6, was fearless and charming, winning over everyone he met. The twins, Robert and Emily, were 4-year-old bundles of mischief who kept their parents on their toes. Kellan was 39 years old now, his dark hair showing the first hints of silver, his face lined by years of sun and wind and hard work. But his eyes were clear and content, no longer haunted by ghosts he could not escape. When he looked in the mirror, He saw a man who had been given a second chance and made the most of it. One spring evening, Kellan and Maeve rode out alone, leaving the children in the capable hands of their eldest son and the housekeeper they had hired the previous year. They followed a familiar trail to a ridge that overlooked the entire ranch, arriving just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in magnificent shades of orange, pink, and purple. "Hard to believe this is all ours," Kellan said, taking in the view. Cattle dotted the landscape, the house and outbuildings looked prosperous and well-maintained, and in the distance he could see some of the hands driving a small herd to fresh pasture. "Not ours," Maeve said with a smile. "Theirs. We are just taking care of it until the children are old enough to inherit." "James will make a fine rancher," Kellan agreed, "but I think Sarah might be the one who really takes this place to the next level. She has your business sense. And Daniel will probably end up as sheriff, so at least we will have law enforcement in the family," Maeve laughed. "I cannot wait to see what the twins decide to do." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. After 12 years of marriage, they could communicate as much with silence as with words, their connection deep and unshakable. "You remember the day we met?" Maeve asked. "You looked so lost, so resigned to being miserable forever. I almost did not hire you because I was afraid you would not stay." "I looked that bad?" Kellan asked with amusement. "You looked like a man who had given up," Maeve said honestly. "But there was something in your eyes when you talked about the work, a little spark of interest, and I thought maybe, just maybe, you could be reached. So I took a chance." "Best chance you ever took," Kellan said, pulling her close. "Best chance we both took," Maeve corrected, kissing him. "We saved each other, Kellan. Neither of us could have built this life alone." She was right, as she usually was. They had found each other when both were lost, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. A family, a home, a legacy. All the things Kellan had thought were forever beyond his reach. As they rode back to the house in the gathering darkness, Kellan felt a profound sense of gratitude for every decision that had led him to this moment. For surviving the war, even though it had nearly destroyed him. For choosing to ride west instead of giving up entirely. For stopping in Lovelock instead of moving on. For walking up to Maeve's door that morning and asking for work. Every choice had been necessary, had led him inexorably to this life he treasured beyond measure. The house glowed with lamplight as they approached, and Kellan could hear the children's voices raised in laughter inside. This was home, not just a place but a feeling, safety, love, belonging, all the things he had lost and found again. "Race you to the barn," Maeve said suddenly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You are on," Kellan replied, and they spurred their horses forward, laughing like the young people they no longer were but sometimes still felt like in moments of pure joy. Maeve won, as she often did, and Kellan dismounted to find her grinning triumphantly. "I let you win," he claimed, making her laugh. "You did not. Admit it, I am a better rider." "Fine, you are a better rider," Kellan conceded, pulling her into his arms. "And a better rancher and a better person, and I am absurdly lucky to have you." "That is more like it," Maeve said, kissing him soundly. They took care of the horses together, working with the easy coordination of people who had performed these tasks side by side 1,000 times, then walked hand in hand to the house. Before going inside, Kellan paused, looking back at the landscape barely visible in the darkness. "What is it?" Maeve asked. "Just thinking about how wrong I was," Kellan said. "When I came here, I expected seasons without joy, years of them. A whole lifetime, maybe. I had resigned myself to just existing, going through the motions until it was over. And instead—" Maeve prompted, though she knew the answer. "Instead, joy bloomed," Kellan said simply. "In your presence, in our life together, in our children, in every day we have built together. You gave me back my ability to feel, to hope, to love. You gave me everything that matters." Maeve squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "We gave that to each other. I was alone too, remember, trying to be strong enough for everything, convinced I had to do it all myself. You taught me it was okay to need someone, okay to lean on another person, okay to share my burdens and my joys." "Then we are both lucky," Kellan said. "The luckiest," Maeve agreed. They went inside together, stepping into warmth and light and the cheerful chaos of their children. James was reading to the twins, Sarah was helping Daniel with his letters, and the house smelled of bread baking and coffee brewing. This was life as it was meant to be lived, Kellan thought, full of love and purpose and connection. Over the next several years, the ranch continued to thrive, and the Jameson children grew into capable young people who made their parents proud. James took on increasing responsibility for the cattle operation, proving himself a natural leader who commanded respect from men twice his age. Sarah began handling all the ranch's business correspondence and accounts, freeing Maeve to focus on strategic planning and expansion. Daniel, though still young, showed signs of the lawman he wanted to become, with a strong sense of justice and remarkable courage. The twins developed their own interests, Robert fascinated by the machinery and equipment, always trying to figure out how things worked, while Emily showed an artistic bent, sketching everything she saw. In 1885, when Kellan was 44 and Maeve 42, they became grandparents for the first time when James married a young woman from Virginia City, and their son was born 9 months later. Holding his tiny grandson, Kellan felt the circle of life complete itself in beautiful ways. This child would grow up on the ranch as his father had, learning the same lessons, building on the same foundation. The legacy would continue. "What should he call you?" James asked, watching his father cradle the baby with practiced ease. "Grandpa is fine," Kellan said, unable to stop smiling. "Or whatever he comes up with on his own." "I still cannot believe my father is a grandfather," Sarah teased. "You are not nearly old enough." "I feel ancient," Kellan joked, though it was not true. Despite the silver in his hair and the lines on his face, he felt vital and engaged with life in ways that belied his years. Hard work and happiness kept him young. More grandchildren followed in the years to come, as the children married and started families of their own. The ranch house Kellan had built expanded again to accommodate family gatherings, with a large dining room that could seat 20 people and a spacious living area where multiple generations could congregate. Sunday dinners became a tradition, the entire family gathering to share a meal and stories, the house ringing with laughter and love. Kellan watched his children parent their own children and saw the values he and Maeve had instilled being passed down another generation. The commitment to hard work and integrity, the importance of education and fairness, the belief that success meant nothing if it came at the expense of others. These were lessons that would outlive him, carried forward by the family he and Maeve had created. In the spring of 1890, Kellan turned 50 years old, an age he never expected to reach when he was stumbling through those dark years after the war. The family threw him a celebration, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the territory, and Kellan was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection and respect. He had built a good life, touched many lives, and created something that would endure long after he was gone. That night, alone with Maeve in their bedroom, Kellan reflected on the journey. 22 years, he said wonderingly. 22 years since I rode into Lovelock expecting nothing and found everything. Best decision you ever made, Maeve said, snuggling against him. She was 50 now, her dark hair liberally streaked with silver, but to Kellan, she was as beautiful as the day they met, maybe more so because of everything they had shared. "Best decision we ever made," Kellan corrected. "You took a chance on a broken-down cowboy who did not even believe in himself anymore." "You were never broken," Maeve insisted, as she always did. "Just lost. And I found you." "We found each other," Kellan said, kissing her tenderly, "and built a life beyond anything I could have imagined. 5 children, 8 grandchildren at last count, a ranch that is the envy of Nevada. But none of that matters as much as this right here. You and me still together, still in love after all these years." "Always," Maeve promised, "until the end of time." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, as they had done for thousands of nights, as they would continue to do for many nights to come. Outside, the Nevada wind whispered through the sagebrush, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the ranch slept peacefully under their watch. The seasons turned as they always did, bringing the rhythms of ranch life that Kellan had learned to love. Spring roundup, summer grazing, fall shipping, winter repairs. Each season had its purpose, its challenges, its satisfactions, and none of them were without joy anymore. Every day brought something to appreciate, to celebrate, to be grateful for. The morning coffee shared with Maeve on the porch. The sight of his children working competently and contentedly. The sound of grandchildren's laughter. The satisfaction of a hard day's work well done. These were the moments that made life worth living. In the fall of 1892, Maeve and Kellan celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation in years. They left the ranch in James's capable hands and took the train west, marveling at how much the world had changed since they were young. San Francisco was bustling and modern, full of electricity and telephones and other technological marvels, but after a week, both were eager to return to their quiet corner of Nevada. "Too much noise," Maeve complained as they boarded the train home. "Too many people." "Give me cattle and sagebrush any day," Kellan agreed. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted with enthusiasm by their children and grandchildren, and Kellan realized this was where he belonged, had always belonged since that autumn day in 1868 when he rode into Lovelock expecting nothing. Home was not San Francisco with all its excitement. Home was here, on this land with these people, living this life they had built together. The years continued to be kind to them. The ranch remained prosperous, their children thrived, and more grandchildren arrived to carry the family forward into the 20th century. Kellan's hair went completely silver, and his joints ached on cold mornings, but his heart remained strong, still full of love for Maeve and the life they shared. On a spring morning in 1898, Kellan woke early as was his habit and lay quietly, watching Maeve sleep. 30 years of marriage, and he still felt grateful every single day for the gift of her presence in his life. She had saved him in the most profound way possible, not by fixing him or changing him, but by loving him exactly as he was and giving him a reason to want to heal himself. Maeve's eyes opened and she smiled sleepily at him. "What are you thinking about?" "Joy," Kellan said simply. "How I expected seasons without it, years without it, a lifetime without it, and how wrong I was, because joy bloomed in your presence and has been blooming ever since." "That is very poetic for so early in the morning," Maeve teased, but her eyes were soft with emotion. "I mean it, Maeve. You gave me back my life. You gave me a family, a home, a future I never thought I would have. Every good thing I am, every good thing I have done, it all traces back to you." "We did it together," Maeve insisted, reaching for his hand. "Stop giving me all the credit. You chose to heal, Kellan. You chose to love again, to hope again, to build this life with me. That was your choice, your courage, your strength." Then we saved each other, Kellan said, squeezing her hand. Yes, Maeve agreed. We did. They rose and dressed and went out to greet another day on the ranch, side by side as they had been for 3 decades. Their children were grown now, running their own operations within the larger framework of the ranch. But Kellan and Maeve remained the heart of it all, the foundation everything else was built upon. As Kellan stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over land he had helped to tame and nurture, he thought about the young man he had been when he first arrived here. Hollow, hopeless, convinced his capacity for joy had been permanently destroyed by war and loss. How wrong he had been. How grateful he was to have been proven wrong, because joy had not been destroyed. It had only been dormant, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. And those conditions had arrived in the form of a strong, stubborn, beautiful woman who refused to let him give up on himself. Maeve had planted the seeds of joy with her love and patience and faith in him, and over the years, those seeds had grown into something magnificent. A family, a legacy, a life of purpose and meaning and deep satisfaction. Kellan had expected seasons without joy, had resigned himself to that fate. But joy had bloomed in Maeve's presence, and it continued to bloom season after season, year after year, filling his life with color and warmth and endless possibility. And for that, he would be grateful until his last breath, knowing he had been given a gift beyond price, a second chance that he had seized with both hands and turned into something beautiful. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning chill, and Maeve came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their world come to life, blessed beyond measure and grateful for every moment. This was joy, Kellan thought. Not the absence of sorrow or hardship, but the presence of love and purpose and connection. And it would bloom in his heart until the day he died, watered by Maeve's love and the life they had built together, strong and enduring as the Nevada land itself.